Yeah, good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to have you here this morning for the keynote panel session of the Winter Simulation Conference 2022. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, in previous editions of the Winter Simulation Conference, we had the opening session and the keynote talk always squeezed into one single session, and we always realized that 1.5 hours was a big challenge because there's so much to be said in the one. And the keynote speech itself is also a topic that deserves the right prominence. So for this year, we decided to split the opening session, which we had last night, from the keynote speech. And in fact, the keynote speech today is, like what I said, it's a keynote panel. And obviously, the keynote panel will be around the conference theme, Reimagine Tomorrow. I already explained about the motivation of this theme yesterday, the theme that was actually invented by the late Professor Lee Lu-hei. And it is now my pleasure to introduce the keynote panel chair, Professor Enver Yücüzen from INSEAD. But before I do that, the sponsor of this keynote panel session is the Huawei company, and to acknowledge that, let me please share you this short video with you.
NOAA's ARC Lab is the AI research lab of Huawei Technology. Our research includes AI theory, AI system engineering, computer vision, speech and semantics, decision making, and recommendation. With cutting-edge simulation and optimization technology, we help to build more efficient port operation system with better and smarter equipment and work plans. With Traffic Simulator, we also explore sensing, routing and planning technologies to enable safer self-driving cars. To revolutionize the ways in which people work and live, and the ways in which companies do business, for intelligentization of all processes, with the slogan, from big data to deep knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much to the Huawei Corporation for sponsoring this keynote panel session. And it's now my pleasure to ask Professor Enver Yücüzen on stage. Thank you.
Hello everyone, good morning. It's really a pleasure to see so many of you in person and our other guests online as part of the Winter Simulation 2022. This was really a dream of Lu-hei's, and as both Peter and Teresa were saying yesterday, we're so happy that we get the opportunity to implement his vision and his dream. And as Peter mentioned a minute ago, the key thing is that we're going to have this keynote opening as a separate session, and what we're going to do is we're going to have, rather than a single speaker, we're going to be having our panel with our distinguished panelists, and this will be indeed based on one of the key initiatives that Singapore as a nation has undertaken, the Smart Nation Initiative and Reimagining Tomorrow, which indeed shapes the theme of this conference. But before I introduce our distinguished panelists this morning, what I want to do is I want to give you a bit of a context about Singapore in particular, because this is the first time the Winter Simulation Conference is in Asia, and of course, we couldn't think of a better place than launching this event in Singapore. Now, when you think about Singapore, it's actually smaller than New York City. It's 719 square kilometers, the entire island. But, and this entire island basically has virtually no natural resources, zero. Of that 719 square kilometers, about 80% of that is urban area, about 18 to 19% is about forest, greenery, and maybe less than 1% arable land for agriculture. So in that sense, very few, if at all, one can speak of natural resources. In spite of this, Singapore is one of the most prosperous nations on this planet Earth. In fact, when you look at it from the purchasing power parity perspective, it is the second richest nation in the world. So how do they do this? The first issue is that it's an economic powerhouse. And this powerhouse is driven by multiple sectors, manufacturing being one of them, contributing to about 25% of the GDP of Singapore. And when you think about manufacturing in Singapore, you're thinking about electronics. That's the reason why our MASM stream of conference here is so big. We're thinking about pharmaceuticals. We're thinking about basically high value added products. But that's not the only one. We also talk about maritime and port operations. In fact, this is the biggest transshipment port in the world. And then there is also an extremely healthy and extremely vibrant financial industry here. Now, the issue is this in and of itself is necessary but not sufficient, but the real secret ingredient in Singapore's success is the country's relentless effort to reinvent itself. And I can be a first-hand kind of a witness to this because even though I've been living in Singapore full-time for the past 4 years, I have been coming to Singapore since the opening of our campus here 20 years ago. Within these 20 years, I have personally witnessed Singapore reinvent itself 3 times. So in that sense, today's panel, Reimagining Tomorrow and looking within this idea of smart nation is something very, very natural. So this is the context within which we're going to be addressing the panel today. And in terms of our speakers, I actually have 3 key leaders representing some of these key industries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a quick introduction of our speakers, but then I'll turn it over back to them so that they can have a much more detailed introduction, both in terms of themselves as well as the organizations that they are leading. So let me start with Mr. Ong here. Mr. Ong here is the regional CEO of the Port of Singapore Authority, and he's in charge of the PSA's international operations. So we're talking about regional, but also international on a global basis in terms of PSA. Not only looking at the portfolio of terminals that they operate, but looking at investments and developing business in terms of expansion opportunities in Southeast Asia. Now, he's part of the venture capital arm of the organization, PSA Unboxed, and of course, part of the reason why he's here is that he's an internal leader for the organization for technology and innovation, and this is how he's actually transforming the organization. Next to him, I have Mr. Hoon Ngien. I knew Hoon Ping for a long time, all the way back when he was actually leading the Land Transport Authority. And then he got the difficult job of managing the food supply chain for FairPrice at the height of the COVID pandemic when food supply chains were pretty much disrupted very, very seriously. He made sure that none of us went hungry during that process. And then now, he's actually, again, going back to his, I guess, first love in terms of, land transport. He's actually managing one of the key transport, the SMRT system, in terms of Singapore. And last but not least, the far corner is Mr. Kenneth Lim, again, coming from port operations. He's the Assistant Chief Executive at Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Now, this is an impressive organization because it consists of some 170 international shipping companies and 5,000 maritime establishments. So it's a global big ecosystem. And the whole idea here is that when we talk about next generation of ports, when we talk about Singapore moving the entire port operations from their existing location to us, he's basically the person behind this big initiative to ensure that the port is ready not only for today, but for future expansions as well. So as you can see, what you have in front of you are 3 leaders who are playing key roles in reimagining tomorrow, in creating this smart nation. So what I will do is, I will actually ask him a series of questions because our focus here is going to be the role that simulation and some of these new technologies are playing in terms of AI, machine learning, etc., in reshaping tomorrow. We'll ask those questions, we'll hear from our leaders, and then what I'm hoping is that we will have 20-25 minutes at the very end to open it up for questions that you might have. So I guess I talk too much, so let me stop here, and Let me start with actually with Mr. Ong and basically say, can you please say something about your organization, a bit more detailed, and the role that you play inside the organization?
Thank you very much, Enver, and also thank you very much, Peter, for the invitation to this conference. In fact, more than a year ago, when Lu He was talking about this conference, he knows that I actually have a very soft spot for simulation and people who have actually exposure and knowledge in operations research analytics. So I immediately say it's a goal for that. And there it is, we are here now. In fact, it is amazing to see, in fact, we have up to 500 attendees. In fact, to me, this is like a gold mine of expert simulation resources and analytics and even all sorts of capabilities. So it is definitely an opportunity for me. So a bit about PSA. Yes, it used to refer to be the Port of Singapore Authority, but let's take away that Port of Singapore Authority. In fact, back in 1997, we were corporatized and we became PSA Corporation, eventually PSA International, for one key reason. We need to diversify from Singapore. So fast forward 25 years ago to today, PSA has actually invested in 30 countries with about 50 over ports all over the world. And if we use in terms of equity count, we are confident to say that we actually the largest port group in the world. And for myself, I've been in the pioneer batch in the overseas expansion back in 2000 in Europe. And then I moved from Europe to Middle East, to India, to China, now back in Singapore, but covering the Southeast Asia portfolio. So we have presence as far as Southeast Asia is concerned in Vietnam, Indonesia, in Thailand, and of course, Singapore port. So my role is basically to make sure the business runs well and look for more business opportunity. And in relations to this conference, I've always, as I said, a soft spot for simulation because I believe a lot of the port processes, port automation, port digitalization requires very, very good support and confirmation of some of the simulation results. And hopefully, during the course of this panelist discussion, we can talk a little bit about that. So over to Hoon Peng.
Please, thank you.
Yeah, very good morning, and first thank Prof for reaching out to me. When I saw an email from him, I can only say yes. Right, been in touch with Prof for quite a while, and I think even when I was in FairPrice, we spoke about use of data, digital, and simulation, and he was right. In fact, I shared at the Maritime Port Authority seminar once that even in the realm of food supply chain, that the use of data, digital, and simulation was a must-have, not a good to have. And yes, it was that whole concern about food availability for all of us here in Singapore that drove me. All right, a little bit about SMRT. Just curious, any of us took the MRT to Marina Bay Sands today? Okay, you have already experienced SMRT, yeah? Because we run the Circle Line, which brings our commuters here right into Marina Bay Sands. And SMRT runs about 77% of the MRT system in Singapore. It is a multimodal transport company running buses as well, besides trains, taxi, and recently we have actually gone a lot into electrification of our fleet. And in fact, also set up a company that helps to decarbonize and then convert from ICE to electric fleet. So the company as a whole, it's like that. And in fact, on this whole topic of simulation, I had some thoughts too this morning about how, and I'll share a bit more later about how we were at some point at the low of the whole, kind of low in our journey in SMRT during the 2011 to 2017 period, but through the use of data, digital, and simulation, right? we are now able to provide the sort of stable, safe, and reliable MRT system that you can enjoy. So with that, I'll pass the time to Kenneth.
Thank you, Bing. And welcome everyone, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kenneth. My job actually for MPA, called Maritime and Port Authority, is to make sure that we are managing the limited resources that we have in Singapore. As Prof mentioned, right, we don't have enough land. In fact, we also don't have enough sea space, and we also don't have enough resources. So what MPA does is to make sure that we make the ecosystem very vibrant, innovative, which is why we welcome such a conference happening in Singapore to tap on the various expertise that you have, to optimize many of the things that we face as a constraint, right? We have constraints, as you know, even in the sea space. When you are flying, for those who are flying in, you will see that out in the plane window, you'll see the vessels that are all berthing or anchorage at our anchorage space. Our anchorage space is as big as Singapore, which is about 700 square kilometers. And if you see all those vessels, some people told us, oh, that is where the sign of congestion. But that is not the congestion, okay? That is just that this is a normal day-to-day where the vessels will anchor at the anchorage space for ship supplies, for bunkering, and of course for operation to be done at the PSA terminal. So at any point in time, there's 1,000 vessels out there in the anchorage space, the bulk tankers, the container liners, as well as other types of vessels that are waiting. So Singapore do about 25% of the global ship supply. We are the top bunkering hub. So last year we did about 50 million metric tons, so which is the top bunkering hub. And of course the transshipment hub that PSA has done very well. So many of the ships will call on Singapore. But with many ships and limited resources, that's where optimization needs to come in. And I think we have set up a center for next generation port to look at our Tuas port. And I think that's where Prof. Lee, Prof. Tan, Prof. They're all here. And we use simulation and optimization to see how we could build our next generation port, which is double the capacity plan, okay? Because last year we did about 37.5 million TEUs, but in the Tuas port, it's going to handle 65 million TEUs in 2040s. So a lot of opportunities for such technology to be applied.
So Kenneth, while you have the microphone, let me ask the second question to you immediately then. Smart Nation, what does it really mean for MPAS, and what is your contribution to that Smart Nation initiative?
Okay, thank you. So, shipping is an enabler for the global supply chain, but shipping industry, there are so many types of vessels, there are different types of operation. So to really get the shipping line to think about the next wave of transformation, we have set up the ecosystem in Singapore to help them to innovate, right? In fact, we have a startup program which is called the Peer Innovation Ecosystem Reimagine. It's to get all these shipping lines to think about what is the new way of doing shipping in the future, right? And in this area, it is about how they optimize their voyages, how they optimize their cargo holds onboard their ships. Of course, with operation with PSA, limited anchorage space. So the question about how do you optimize the ship supply to the vessels, right? At which point is the best boarding time, boarding place, and also to consolidate the cargoes into ship supplies for the vessels. We're also thinking about what other modes of optimization. You could use drones for some of the ship supplies delivery. We have encouraged companies to do 3D printing So how do you optimize your ship parts system so that by the time you come to Singapore for your bunkering, for your ship supply, for your cargo operation, you also can replenish your spare parts 3D printed in Singapore. So many of these are very good problem statements for a lot of academic and industry to come together to collaborate on using simulation, at the same time optimization to solve this industry problem. And if we can do that, then actually the whole transformation of shipping to enable global supply chain, energy transition, decarbonization will have a very good chance and opportunity for all to contribute and to make it work. Yeah.
Thank you. Hoon Ping, let's get on land. The same question, what does it mean, Smart Nation? How does SMRT actually contributing to that vision?
Thank you. I think first of all, the way we look at Smart Nation, it's not just about playing with technology, playing with the latest tools, but really about smart application of technology or methods to solve real life operational or business problems. And if I may just do a bit of marketing to thank NUS, because besides the fact that I was school in INSEAD on some of the programs, I also want to thank NUS because I spent time there taking up the industrial and system engineering, and that's the reason why I am, in some sense, a firm believer in the use of data, digital and simulation, not just in the public transport domain, but also food, because really it's so applicable in so many fields. Coming back to Smart Nation, well, I think the first and foremost, what is it that we're trying to do and what drives us? So in the area of public transport in SMRT, it is about moving all of you, moving people and enhancing lives so that you don't spend too much time traveling. You can get to the point where you want to go to, and also enhancing lifestyle, right? In fact, we are using data, understanding patterns to curate people's experience when they travel on an MRT system so that they have improved lifestyle. On a more hard engineering aspect, we actually use a lot of data and digital to improve our reliability so that you can actually have very smooth rides. And in fact, during the 2017 period, when I was still in LTA working with SMRT then, and we were trying to improve the MRT system, we actually use a lot of simulation. In fact, now we have quite a few simulation centers for train signaling, which is probably the most in the whole world, right? I firmly believe in it, and then we push for it. So we have a simulation center for Thalys, all right? And we also have a simulation center for Alstom. And we actually use those very rigorously to test out the signaling system before we launch a new software patch onto our train. So traditionally, when we launch a train, whenever there's a software change, you kind of do it at OEM site, then sort of put it to where the country of need is, then you just basically load on one train, test it at night, 3 trains at night, then voila, 100 trains the next day. I didn't think that was rigorous enough, and that was the reason why pre-2018, you get a lot of jerky rides. Perhaps not perfect yet now, but I would say that it's much better now. And we typically load the signaling software onto our simulation center and test it hundreds or sometimes thousands of times. We test it through various scenarios, including potential cyber issues, before we launch the train. And so I'm not sure how many of you have taken Thomson East Coast Line, the latest one that runs all the way into Orchard, but that too was a testimony of the use of simulation. And in a company, we don't just look at simulation as it were the use of technology alone, high tech, and but also the way we think about issues. I encourage my teams, my people, to think through scenarios. War gaming as applied in the military is also a kind of simulation. So a lot of times I told my people to think through what might happen when there's a train disruption, when there are passengers who are unwell. How do we deal with them? How do we help them? And that requires some form of simulation, although not as complex as the one I spoke about as a simulation center for a signaling system. But really the whole idea of simulation, the whole idea of using data, making decisions based on data, being objective, is something that we want to be very pervasive in my company. And I will just end off by saying that insofar as Smart Nation is concerned, insofar as use of data, digital, and simulation is concerned, it is not a good to have, but a must have, so that we can serve all of you better. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim Pong. Let's go back to the ports.
Okay, thank you, Amber. I'll put it across in this context first. First of all, I myself am not a simulation or analyst expert. In fact, the practitioners are all right in front of me, sitting beside me. And they are very strong, good resources over here. But I see myself as a strong embracer from my organization of how to tap this capability, this skill set for the PSA International. And while we talk about Smart Nation, it is not limited to Singapore. It is what we apply here and then propagate and scale it across the whole group, because we are present already now about 50 over other ports. So I will just put into two contexts into it. When it comes to Smart Nation initiative, I would say that this port equipment technology that we have to actually embrace and change it. And I would just use the Singapore context as an example. When we first started in the city terminal, Keppel, Brani, Tanjong Pagar, which if you see it from over here, some of the old cranes are over there. It's been around for about 50 years. It is the first generation of port technology. And as we fast forward to Pas Panjang, we have actually semi-automated the port. And what does it mean from a business angle? We actually have saved or improved our labor productivity by nearly 30%. And that's actually quite substantial saving, especially for a country like Singapore, where labor is actually scarce, as what Amber was saying. Not only we have resources scarcity, labor is also becoming a scarcity situation. And if we fast forward to Tuas, whereby we have already 4 berths operating, and these 4 berths are giving me like 4 million TEU capacity. 4 million may sound small in relative, say, to Singapore context of 37 million, but 4 million in many other ports around the world, it can be among the top ports already. And that actually helped us to see 100% labor productivity improvement, purely by using very good port technology through automation. Because Pas Panjang is semi-automated, City Terminal is not automated, Tuas is fully automated. And we can touch a little bit about the full automation of the yard equipment, the quayside equipment, even the horizontal transport of AGVs, but it doesn't end there. In fact, we are looking at the interfacing with the industry around. So that kind of automation requires quite a fair bit of very good data analytics, simulation, and interface with the rest of the other ecosystem. And that's on the port equipment technology. There's actually a very important aspect, which is actually digitalization. In fact, Kenneth mentioned quite a fair bit about the part that the MPA is working on with the various stakeholders. As port operator, PSA, we also believe in very important API interoperability, internodal interfaces. That means we need to have very good digitalization. And Hoon Peng mentioned about data sharing. Data is actually a very, very important resource, because if you do not have data, you have nodes, you can be connected, nothing flows. So we need to have very good data exchange, data standards, data understanding, and creating data into knowledge. So that digitalization aspect of things is actually just as important. So on the seaside, you probably heard about the DigiOcean, DigiPorts, and even within the PSA group, the cousin company, we call it PSA Marine. We actually introduced a couple of platforms called the One Handshake, the Opti arrive, and then on the land side, as what Hoon was mentioning, while we may have containers of nice goods coming in, we need to be able to transfer them to the warehouses, to the distribution centers. So those needs to be interfaced, and we have also introduced a number of platforms like the Opti Arrive, iBox, and Smart Booking. Just to close off this introduction, I myself, besides being the regional CEO for PSA in the Southeast Asia region, I'm also covering as the chair for the Crimson Logic board, as well as leading the Unbox for PSA. What's Unbox? Unbox is actually the PSA startup. We know what we know, but we have to go for those unknowns, new startups, whereby it may actually comes out with good solutions for us. So Unbox is actually looking at regionally, locally, and even internationally of any good companies that can help us to find solutions. And solutions, more often than not, involves quite a fair bit of analytics, data, even simulation. Thank you, Enver.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, before I go into the details, technicalities, since we're talking about reimagining tomorrow, I want to ask a question about tomorrow, and especially with respect to some of the mega trends, some of the key worries that has to be part of the planning for tomorrow. So what are these? We have to worry about sustainability, decarbonization of supply chains. Hoon mentioned this, we have to worry about cybersecurity because now increasingly we are connected systems. And then on the less pleasant side, we're talking about geopolitics, we're talking about counter winds or headwinds with respect to deglobalization. The big tug of war between the US and China. So Singapore being such a big hub, how does this affect your plans for tomorrow? Because part of this has to be resilience, because our theme for next year's conference is going to be resilient systems. And given the fact that we're talking about tomorrow, so my specific question is, as you are working towards this Smart Nation initiative within your organizations, how do you take into account these potential complications, potential challenges and opportunities as part of tomorrow? So let me put this, and whoever would like to go first, please. Please.
Maybe I share a bit of this, maybe because I'm familiar with crisis. Okay, actually, I have also been sharing with my colleagues that gone are the days when every day is the same, every year is the same, but we need to be more aware and prepared, mentally prepared for uncertainties. In fact, I bought a couple of books on uncertainties. I have my team read it up. And in fact, we should be comfortable with uncertainties. Of course, you could see it as a major stressor, or you could see it as an opportunity. So besides what Prof here mentioned, there are also uncertainty and challenges on manpower resource, the competition for talent, finance, and of course, the actual availability of energy, because the MRT system runs on electricity, right? So when you have a lack of LNG because of what's happening in Europe, then the war, and then you find that you don't have enough, maybe not enough to produce electricity here in Singapore, or becoming very expensive. I would say that in terms of being ready for the future, I think first my guidance to my team has always been stay focused on what your mission is, which is to move people, enhance lives, enhance the lifestyle. That you know where generally you're going, the general direction, but be prepared for slight deviations and do not see them as disturbances but opportunities. And we, not for the sake of, because today is simulation seminar, but we do a lot of mental preparation, scenario analysis, war gaming, and also simulation, because you need to be prepared for a whole range, a whole spectrum of possibilities, from what is most likely, example, you have a most likely scenario, and to the most dangerous, what might go really wrong against all your thinking, and are you really prepared for it? So that's how we try to operate within the range of what is most likely and what is the most difficult and dangerous for us as a company, as an organization. And I think if our people remain agile and resilient, not to hope that the uncertainties or the risks will go away one day, but just be positive, be cheerful, be thinking through what are the contingency plans you might have. And that's something I learned through reading some of the books about how people stay mentally strong even when they were going through Holocaust. An old book, but I was reading it when I was going through COVID at FairPrice. And I read it and found it very inspiring because I never knew when COVID will come to a more stable state like today where we can take off our mask. But I just have to stay positive and resilient with the rest of my team. And I think now back in SMRT, I think it is just going to be the new norm, all right? And yes, there could be better times, but I think in terms of preparing for the future, that's where I would say simulation becomes even more important. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Gentlemen, who?
So maybe I'll go and let Kim Pong do the concluding part. For me, I think tomorrow how we think about it first maybe is to see in tomorrow's world how the supply chain will look like, right? Given all the geopolitics and all the demands, COVID also have a new norm of working. So, in the public sector, we have this slogan, right? The future of work, future of workplace, and the future of workforce. So, if you look at these three areas, the future of work in the supply chain in the world will be different from today, and how different it will be affected by the technology, by all these geopolitics, and by the demand and supply. So, then the question is, what can Singapore play in this tomorrow's supply chain, which actually the line between shipping and energy and many of these are blurred, right? Because like the same fuel in the future will be actually consumed by a lot of energy industry, by shipping industry, by all sectors. So the green energy itself is, it is going to be a major challenge for the world, and therefore, what is Singapore's role in that new future, right? So the future of work will definitely look different. The future of workforce will also be very different. The newer generation, the place in which they grow up, the culture, the education that they have, the workforce will be very, very different. Working from home is now like almost a norm, and therefore, how are you going to have such a new way of working in the future as well? So I think the workforce is different, and we have undertaken a few job redesign exercise with the industry to understand how in the shipping industry, in the maritime industry, the type of seafaring jobs will be different in the future, right? Because if ships in the future are autonomous, you have autonomous cars, and if you have autonomous ships in the future, how is it going to be like for the workforce? Are they going to be all in the control center, monitoring the voyages globally, and managing and interfacing with the machines? And of course, then cybersecurity become a big, big challenge that we need to handle. So the workforce has to be retrained, has to be also up in terms of their capability. The workplace by itself will also change in the future. I think that is how we perceive how technology, how all these new norms will also affect the future of workplace. So I think that's how tomorrow will be like. And in many of these circumstances, scenarios, I think technology will have a role to play. And also in terms of mindset of people and the capabilities that we need to acquire in the future will also be different. I think I like Hoon Ping's point about that. In organization, we need to also create the awareness that people should think about scenarios, and based on scenarios, how do they do the simulation? Because for the shipping industry, assets are very capital intensive. So you can't just build and then say, oops, I don't think this design is the best, so I think that's not the way to go. And also in some circumstances, there is also no second chance. So if green ammonia is going to be a future fuel for shipping, bunkering of green ammonia is going to be a very delicate matter because ammonia is toxic. So how are you going to make sure that the ship operations and even in a small country like Singapore, how do you make sure that you have enough assurance? And that assurance cannot be physical because if you have smoke and the whole cloud fly into Singapore city areas, that will be catastrophic. So a lot of simulation will have to happen. The scenarios will have to happen. So many of these future and reimagined futures will have a lot of opportunity for experts like yourself to contribute and to make this place safer. Yeah. Kim Pong. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think both panelists shared quite an extensive big scope regarding this particular topic of sustainability and resilience. And I shall leave the honor of Enver to do that conclusion. But I'll share it from a different perspective of sustainability and resilience. In fact, it's actually not a new word that is created due to COVID. It's always been around for a while, just that COVID makes it even more important. And my take from a business angle of sustainability and resilience is actually related to a circular economy. And I always say that there are actually 5 elements in a circular economy. You have about food, water, waste, materials, and energy. Earlier on, I shared about the transformation of the port in Singapore and also overseas from a very conventional port that is actually quite labor-intensive to a semi-automated port to now a fully automated port, which means that our dependency of the manpower muscles is actually reducing, moving to more electrification, moving towards more automation, which means that our dependency on electrons has actually gone up. The machines need electrons now. You're not going to use a human people to crank it anymore. Not diesel, nothing. It's all about electrons. And the electrons has to be green in view of the decarb targets that we are achieving. So this aspect of the circular economy is actually very, very important in a few countries, like in this particular case for Singapore, whereby 95% of our electrons are actually imported. And it is not very green at this very moment. So we need to actually solve that aspect of it. And there's also a second angle towards it. As machines are available, they need to be able to communicate with each other. And that means the communication through human beings, maybe through the comm system, but machines do not use the comm system like the human beings do. So we need to have very good communication systems for the machines. And how do machines behave towards each other? And in fact, I have a colleague here. We always say that those AGVs, the automated guided vehicles, must be able to communicate to each other. They have to have a lot of gossiping among themselves so that they do not get congested at one corner. They're actually well distributed. So this kind of simulation, it is very, very important. In fact, I believe many digital twin specialists are over here. And so digital twin is actually one of the most important things for us to be able to simulate, say, the gossiping of the AGVs. Because we cannot just throw it into the live operations and let it happen. No, we have to simulate it before we actually put in place the activation. So I'll just stop there. Yeah.
Please.
Just 1 or 2 minute add-on. In fact, I at the risk of sounding a bit pessimistic just now, it's always good to start with a bit of pessimism, but I'm actually a very optimistic person as an individual. So what happens is that while I painted the not so bright future, as it were, and the challenges, but there are many opportunities, and I thought I'd just cite one of them, which is the opportunity that comes with this whole focus on sustainability, right, electrification. And that was the reason why SMRT started a EV, electric vehicle company that does leasing of electric vehicles, helping the SMEs to transform, as well as EV charging. Recently, we won a contract, and that actually allows for us, because one of our partners is also a power generation company, and we're trying to bring in so-called green electrons. And finally, we would be able to gather a lot of data from all the use of it, and how do we optimize the use of electricity. So from a sort of challenge, which is really the challenge of energy, converting it into a sustainable approach, and in fact a new business idea. So I think there are a lot of opportunities, and of course underlying this is a lot of simulation, thinking through and planning out what a better future could be in spite of the challenges. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now, what I want to do is I want to bring this back to a concrete platform once again, because what you see in front of you here are some of the world leaders in simulation, stochastic modeling, machine learning, optimization via simulation. So the question is to take advantage of this vast resource here. What keeps you awake at night? I mean, what are some of the open problems in your work right now? And you say, well, here's an industrial scale problem. Some of the traditional techniques do not work. I wish I had some new methodology. I wish I had some sort of a new approach for this. So in that sense, what are some of the open problems that you would want this intellectually high horsepowered people have a deep look at?
Well, I can start because, as I said, I'm familiar with crisis. I know what is it that will cause me and maybe some of my teammates to lose our jobs. So I think about those things. No, just jokes aside, but on a more serious note, you want to be able to deal with the major disruptors. So I spoke about energy, but the other aspect is really about train disruptions. I think you would have read in other countries there has been such challenges, and Singapore is not unfamiliar. But in order to have a very reliable train system, it's a very costly undertaking as well. To achieve our more than 1 million min-kilometers between failure, we have to expend a lot of resources. So the thing that the focus that we have today is actually going to predictive maintenance, i.e. you don't maintain too much or too little, but just in time. It is as much science as well as it is art, because you could have data that points to the fact that some subcomponent is going to fail. The question is, do you change it out now based on certain thresholds, or you change it out later when you allow for that disruption to have happened? And what is the trade-off? So that is really something that we are going very deep into, gathering data, understanding the patterns, looking at scenarios. And SMRT is very deep into this, together with the Land Transport Authority. For two reasons. One, to prevent major disruption, and secondly, to be able to optimize our resources so that we don't over-maintain, but at the same time, to avoid under-maintaining. Of course, the usual, what we call preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance will still remain, but it's just that sometimes components do fail ahead of their promised MKBF or MTBF. So that's where we are actually looking at as one of our key problem sets. So we will welcome definitely anyone who has got ideas on that or who would like to contribute to this particular domain. Thanks.
Thank you. Kenneth?
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll take this chance to tap on all the expertise here. Maybe I'll cite three, I'm very greedy, right? Three problem statements. One is that we are pushing a lot in terms of the green and digital corridor with the different port authorities around the world. So the whole motivation behind that is, as we encourage all the shipping lines to have different trading routes across the world, between ports we must be able to allow them to do optimization of their assets when they arrive in different ports, right? So that is, of course, to ease the congestion, but also to make sure that the carbon emission, and of course the saving of fuels and all that will be making sense. So in this green and digital corridor, which we actually have now done with Port of Rotterdam, we have signing up with Long Beach, and of course then we have going to go with Australia, China, and many other ports. The question is, for shipping lines, there are many vessels that they have in the fleet of vessels. When they want to come to Singapore, how do we arrange such that it is a just-in-time operation? And in that kind of a problem area, there is a lot of stakeholders. the terminal operation, you got the harbor craft, you got the bunkering, you got ship supply activities, you got the pilotage activity. There are so many activities, and there's 1,000 vessels, right, that comes into the Singapore port. How do you orchestrate that into a very nice activity-based program such that the vessels will know 3 days in advance or many days in advance, if you could, not to speed up, just to slow down nearer the port, right? So by not speeding up during the voyages and maintaining a consistent speed, we think that they will actually lower the emission, right? And then, of course, they will have a more predictable schedule when they come to Singapore as well. So that's under the one group of statements that is working with different port authorities and shipping lines. The second problem, actually, very much we learned from Hoon is the electrification of harbor craft. So when on the land side, there's electrification of vehicles for the same area that we had in the sea space. We want to electrify the harbor craft. Then the question is, where are all the charging stations, right? And the fact is that the operating profile of a harbor craft is different from transferring of crew and of transfer of goods, and of course for bunkering, for pilotage, for tugboat. These are all different operations in the sea port like us. And we have about 1,600 harbor craft, and to service these 1,000 vessels out there in the anchorage, how do we optimize and how do we do the simulation of various charging stations, even renewable, such that we can then give them the energy that they need, right? And of course, the next challenge statement which I put up is really this ship supply part, which I earlier mentioned. So if you want to optimize the way we have the ship supply boat to service the ships, then how do you optimize and simulate such that we can do better in terms of helping many of these who are SMEs, right? How do you consolidate the supplies into a place, and then how do you do milk run across the various ships at the anchorage? So those are my 3 challenge statements. But also maybe take this chance to also ask the expert here that actually for many of the simulation, one of the things that we talk about in the C4NGP Center is about standardization of the simulation language such that you can allow more pervasive use by the enterprises, right? So it should not be proprietary, but how do we scale it such that we could allow more enterprises to leverage on simulation and optimization capabilities into SME industry. As if you can allow the SME to actually tap on such capability, they themselves will be uplifted and in terms of capability and more pervasive use of such technology. So for the center, we were, and thanks to Prof. Chu and Prof. Lee earlier on, they were pushing for the port ML language, which is a markup language to describe how a port would look like. If everyone could have a standard way of representing a port, and every simulation software can take this as a default format and do all the various simulation, machine learning and all that, it will actually open up a lot more opportunity for different ports to come in, the whole value chain from design of port to operation to maintenance of port. I think that kind of challenge, not so much for the industry, but for the community here, is to see how we could move forward in that area. Thanks.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Endo. Thanks both Kenneth and Hoon Ping for that sharing. I will just share one story here. It is about 30 years ago. Although I said I'm not a practitioner, I happened to have a chance to do a little course in Suriname, in the UK, and in Monterey, also a very small course over there. So with a bit of knowledge, then 30 years ago, my boss asked me, okay, I have this gut feel, of a scenario ABC, and the outcome is going to be X, Y, Z, and make sure that the next door company or neighbor do not know my gut feel is correct. And 30 years ago, if we ever have data it is very rare. And even though you have data, it's not clean. And the best machines were like the AS400. I mean, it's a painful thing to even to do any coding. And the rest is history. So you fast forward to today. Have the situation changed? Definitely has changed. I mean, technology has gone deep and bounds, and there are so many simulation packages. Data is abundant. I mean, cleaning of data is a lot more easier. And you've reached the point of so much data that you do not know which kind of data to actually use. But there lies in two challenges, one of which actually was mentioned in the paper. Simulation actually allows quite a fair bit of scenario planning of what if, based on a certain sets of parameters, based on certain sets of assumptions, and then you do what if and you come up with an answer. But in today's world, I use the example of allowing machines to be operating on its own. And the day when I have 2,000 AGVs running in the Tuas port, that's a lot of machines. I cannot afford the what if. I need the what is situation. In other words, it has to be nanoseconds, milliseconds of decisions. No more scenario planning. They have to be very, I wouldn't use the word AI, but I would say that the machine learning has reached a point whereby everything is self-decided. So we need to be able to achieve that. So that challenge is actually quite key as we move towards automation, as we move towards very quick digitalization. But then the next door situation will always happen. How can we actually share data? Because if we can do whatever simulation within that 4 doors or 4 walls or 4 fences, it is only that so much intrinsic that you have. We must be able to go across into extrinsic of simulation and sharing your data. But you know, in the commercial world, there is always a challenge. So we need to find a comfort zone whereby there's sufficient data sharing, even standardization of sharing of data. It is also key. So I'll just share these two aspects of the challenge.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let me ask you a corollary question, because part of the job that we have as academics is to train people. And you were talking about, the changing nature of the workplace, the changing nature of the profile of the people. So when you hire new people in this brave new world, what are some of the key characteristics that you look for? How should we train them? What skill sets, hard, soft? What are the maybe top 5 skills that you're looking for in someone that you're considering for a specific position in that brave new world?
If I may start, so that my team can have a break. So we kind of tag team and help each other out. So I just want to quote something that my chairman, Mr. Siamoming, said. He's now the chairman of NUS High School. So he was sharing with me how one of the most significant changes he's actually in the process of making for NUS High School kids is to train them to be street smart and not just book smart. It's true, I think the boys and girls who go to NUS High School, they are extremely academically smart. But whether they are street smart or not is something that we can train. And for us as a company in SMRT, I would say that we look at candidates quite regardless of their academic background. Of course, some basics of what you ought to know technically has to be there. But I think a proven record of being an analytical, critical thinker, and also the ability to get along as a team. I've worked over many years with people who may be academically there, but just have difficulty working with people, working as a team. So it's very difficult for those individuals to achieve things of significance, or for that matter to lead a team. So sometimes it actually hampers their own progression. So I think, of course, on the converse, we are not just looking at people who can rah-rah. I mean, they ought to have some substance. So I think it's about both. And really having a bit of being a lot more open-minded and being able to get along, because as I said earlier, the world is getting very uncertain, right? If we are only used to a set piece of question and a set piece of answer, then I think we may not be quite ready for the future. So if I'm looking, or we in SMRT are looking for the new generation of people who join us and eventually lead the organization. We're looking for people who are going to be comfortable with uncertainties, to ask the right questions, to frame the questions, and then to find answers to those questions, not just by themselves, but in the context of a team. Yep.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Maybe I'll go next, and then after that, Kenneth can sum it up. I'll be succinct with my sharing over here. I will use the triangulation of 3 items. First, you definitely need that talent, and to a certain extent, talent can be bought, can be acquired through the market, through the institution, through from various ways, or even collaborating with IHL, or even with some of the simulation companies. So that is actually important. But the second part, it is a bit challenging just from the market, which is actually domain knowledge. Because while a person may have all the technical know-how, the domain knowledge is actually quite key. And the domain knowledge also have to have a bit of system thinking throughout, because it is, like for example, in the case of the port industry, we need to have the domain knowledge of the port processes, and it doesn't stop at the operational processes, which we tend to focus on the operational aspects. We need to actually have an interface with even the customers. The human experiential touch, it is actually quite key in some of the solutioning. And sometimes we also have to add in the financial angle towards it. And now, we even had an earlier on discussion about sustainability and resilience. So a bit of understanding of the aspects of it is actually also key. So that system thinking aspect, it is actually important in the training exposure. And the final part of the triangulation, we need to have sandboxes. You have the talent, you have the system thinking. If you do not allow a real playground, and it's just a pseudo virtual playground, it remains a pseudo virtual playground. We must allow the real application of such kind of sandboxes to be used, to be activated, and to be replicated, duplicated elsewhere. And this is something that is very key in the organization, to make sure that it is not just another tool for the CEO or for the tech officer, but it has to be something that it can be used in the whole organization, not just for one place, but replicate it across the whole organization. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. And I would dare to say I sum up, but I from the observation that I had, and I take an example of the decarb area, which is pretty new in the shipping. A lot of feedback from shipping lines are on younger talent who actually are very keen to learn, right? So he will say, well, this person, he may not be very into sustainability, but he pick it up very fast. So the ability to pick up the domain knowledge, as what Kim Pong said, is important. And to be able to pick up that domain knowledge is to have that curiosity to know what's in that ecosystem that you are dealing with. So having that systemic view or ecosystem view will be important. Especially, I think maybe in US, maybe you have very big companies and you just have a domestic, very large market there. But for Singapore, which is so small, we had to, the people here needs to think about what will we do that can actually make a difference, right? Because it's a small nation that actually needs to play up our role in the global scene. So that whole ecosystem thinking has to be there to think about what am I doing that will actually has an impact on the global supply chain, for instance. So I think that will be the kind of talent that we'll be looking for. Of course, first 2 year, first 3 year, you can't see that and you can't cultivate that, but the ability to be curious, understanding what the whole landscape is will be quite critical in my view. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. One thing that I had forgotten to mention at the beginning is that I had asked these gentlemen to actually provide me with their position statements, we put them in a conference proceedings paper, and as Teresa says, it's on the app. You can actually access that through the app. And a lot of the issues that we have touched upon this morning are fleshed out in further detail on that position paper in the conference proceedings. At this point, I think I'm going to stop and I'm going to open it up for the audience. If you have any questions, please, this is the time to actually address those questions to any one of our panel members. I just need the very first, please go ahead. We have, if I may, we have these microphones set up. Would you mind coming up to the microphone so that our online participants can also hear the question? Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for a fantastic panel. I found it really, really interesting. I have a question. The three of you are highlighting how the workforce has to adapt in order to match the needs of industry in the future. How do you communicate with universities and with educational programs to inform them about what is it that you need to develop the further generations?
Please.
Yeah, I could start on that. Actually, sometime in, I think July, thereabouts, we actually signed MOUs with a few Institute of Higher Learning. And in fact, one of the universities that we're working very closely with is Singapore Institute of Technology. And besides the fact that we open up doors for interns to work with us so that they can start to experience the environment, we actually allow or encourage lecturers to be attached to our work environment so that they experience firsthand the sort of operational business problems we're having. And then we provide inputs as well in terms of curriculum development. That is not just with SIT, but also with the other Institute of Higher Learnings as well. And we are very happy and prepared to work with more institutions so that, in a way, the academic institutions have a direct feel in terms of the sort of job requirement, not just now, but for the future, in the workplace, and then being able to bring that back to translate those understanding into actual curriculum to grow our students. So in SMRT, we actually have students who in their third year, sometimes half a year or entire full year, they actually attach to us. And of course, if they find that it's a good fit beyond those descriptives that I've given you, they actually join us. And they find that they can perform very well. So we are actually doing a lot of that communication. It's a two-way thing. We in the company are also learning about what the institutions are able to offer in terms of the thinking, the knowledge, and then we see how we can leverage on both sides. And this is actually something that the Singapore's Ministry of Education is promoting in a very big way, that sort of nexus between companies and institutions.
May I, if you may introduce yourself and where you're from?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Clarissa Gonzalez. I'm a PhD student in Chalmers in Sweden, Mexican originally.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I will share it from the most organization, in this particular case, PSA. We actually have a three-way of approaching the IHL. So one way is a direct engagement with the IHL, whether they have a center or whether they have any specialist faculty or department in that particular area, and then we engage them with the problem statement. So that's one way. Another way is sometimes we work with the authority to come up with, say, hackathons, come up with ideas, and then we let various university IHL research houses to participate and come up with ideas with that. And then the third way, it is a very interesting informal way, because sometimes the IHL do have courses related to, be it supply chain, be it simulation, that is closely linked to a certain extent. And then we do, like my case, I'm actually also become a guest lecturer, and over there we start to spot talent, because after whatever lectures we will interface, we interact and engage the students, and then from there we find talent. So there are actually multiple ways. Yeah.
I would just add that actually for MPA, every year we do engage the industry, which is the industry owners, the leaders, to get challenge statement, typically February, March. And by June, we usually publish this challenge statement to the community, both the researchers, plus the startups, plus the campus students. And then we have the different drivers. The peer-71s take care of the startup. We have a Singapore Maritime Institute that will look after all the, interact with all the IHLs in Singapore to propagate such as challenge statements. And of course, we have Singapore Maritime Foundation that will reaching out to the talent in the university for digital challenge and all that. So those are the process. And every October, Singapore Maritime Institute will hold a Singapore Maritime Institute Forum to share what are the industry challenges, trends, and insights to the IHLs and the COE. We call them the Center of Excellence in the universities. And of course, every April, Singapore Maritime Week is where we gather the international leaders to Singapore and invite the IHL to also join us to hear what are some of the trends and insights that these companies have. So we welcome all participants to come back in April, but of course WSC should also, maybe have a channel in which we could disseminate some of this challenge statement to you so that you could consider that and take up the challenge if possible. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have newsletters, so basically what I'll do is I'll come back to you for the statement, and then we can actually publish it in the spring edition of our newsletter. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the answers. Other questions from the audience, please. Please, may I ask you to step up to the microphone so that...
Hello, everyone. My name is Samer Al-Samadi. I am also a PhD student from the Industrial Engineering Center in France. And so my question is basically, we talked about simulation, and I think we can all agree that it's important either for decision-making or using it as a decision support tool. But throughout the talk, we talked about digital twins. And so it's kind of a buzzword right now. And so my question to you is, do you plan on using digital twins as truly an online connected system in which you can monitor the system in front of you as it's working in real time? Or is it just going to be an offline mode in which you study the system before launching it?
Okay, I can take that one. Actually, you brought up a very interesting question. I was going to talk about it just now, but I forgot. But thanks for raising it. Yes, you're right. It's such a buzzword, right? I'll just share two examples. When I was in the Fair Price group, I was the CEO of the supply chain. We actually were working with one of our institutions of higher learning to have a digital twin. But it is not just to understand the model and operations, but it was for real-time online interventions in terms of how you run the operation. So recently, here in SMRT, we're also looking at a startup company who's got a nice and neat way of coming out with a digital twin for a station. When you are inside the MRT station, you might think that it's a very simple, just a pass-through. But there are many subsystems in there, not least the way we control ventilation and a host of other electrical utility systems. We actually would want a digital twin that models it on a real-time basis almost, so that as and when something acts up, our engineers can use the digital twin to go directly to the problem area to deal with it, either to change a part or to do some other repair work. And so that's actually what we're doing, and it will be online so that the engineers can have access to what's happening in the so-called digital twin. So we will not just be satisfied with a sort of static digital twin for study purposes, but in fact a real-time problem-solving one. Yep. That's for SMRT. Can't speak the same for PSA. Probably got to
MPAS or PSA.
Indeed, a very good question, and I will put it into this particular context. My layman understanding of a digital twin is replicating something that is not immediately live, and it is something that you can replicate through a simulation. So it's that degree of that replication. If it's a passive replication, yeah, I mean, it's fine. If it's a very active replication, now I share and put it back to the team who is actually going to do the digital twin, is that how confident are we that it is able to give a very good, solid solution? Because if it's able to give a very solid solution, why twin it? Immediately apply it, and not just for monitoring. So it's about that confidence level and capability to replicate it fast. And as I always hope that we do not go into just what if is what is. If we can actually reach as high level of digital twinning into a what is scenario immediately, that is the ultimate that we hope to achieve. So I hope I answer from my perspective. Thank you.
And from the Port Authority, we had a digital twin of the Anchorage space. Actually, control room is almost like what's happening, replicating what's happening out there in the Anchorage. But of course, all the visualization and all that may not be as sexy. But I think that is the way we want to move forward. And in terms of whether it's planning and whether it's operation, whether it's for maintenance, a digital twin, if you could work it out in a standard way, actually will save a lot and make a lot of business sense, actually. I'll tell you in shipping, when someone wants to build a ship, they will ask the ship designer to build the ship. They will have their own proprietary software. They come up with some CAM drawing and all that. And then when you go to shipyard, the shipyard maybe replicate that into their own software or buy the proprietary software. And then when you go to the Port Authority for approval, for the class, the flag, again, another set. So actually, the value chain could benefit a lot from a digital twin, from the time they conceptualize the ship, to the delivery of the ship, to the running of the ship, to the maintenance of the ship. I think that itself will be a very powerful concept. For city, before I came to MPA, I was working on digital twin of Singapore, right? The 3D model of Singapore. And we were contemplating to use City GML as the markup language to standardize how we kind of model the city so that you can have different levels of details, so that at some operation do not need the very detailed one, but some operation requires very detailed up to the material of the material used in the construction. So I think standardization was the challenge I posed to everyone. If we could actually come up with a way to represent certain of the digital twin world that we are working on, I think that will be a very good start, that every one of us will feel comfortable to promote, to push for such concept in the industry. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, gentlemen. Other questions from the audience? Let me turn it over back to you, gentlemen. If I could give you 1 minute each for some concluding thoughts before I wrap up this session.
Then let me start first. I wouldn't be 1 minute in 10 seconds. Resources with simulation capabilities, system thinking, analytics, it is actually far and few. It's very rare. And it is actually something that all organizations, not just the big organization, all organizations need to have. And in fact, I am very strong, as at the beginning of the session, I was saying that I really embraced it. In fact, the various parts of PSA International, when we go overseas, we try to set up operations planning departments, simulation centers, and at least within the group, we try to share as much as possible. In fact, having a community of all this allow and encourage a lot of exchanges of good ideas. And it is layering upon all these capabilities that make a very, very sophisticated simulation, like a digital twin, into even immediately applicable into a live operations. And I've always looked forward to that. So thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me to be here also. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here.
Well, I saved my time by saying ditto. I agree with what he said. But really thank all of you for being here and the field of simulation and being prepared and all that. It's a continuous field, something that we have to learn. But if I may just sum up, partly because I'm a scout. I grew up as a scout. I'm the vice president of Singapore Scout Council. And one of the things that we emphasize a lot to all our boys and girls scouts is just these two words: be prepared. And that's what I tell myself every day: be prepared. And to be prepared, you need to plan out, you need to do scenario planning, and you need to do simulation, right? So simply put, be prepared, because the world is going to be very uncertain. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think if I was to say anything else, I'm preaching to the choir about the importance of simulation and optimization. But I will say take action. Right? My call for action is really, you hear of all the challenges, your expertise. The question is, how do we, after this conference, go back and say, I have one action to take? And the action is whether you want to link up to C4NGP or to all the universities, IHL in Singapore, to find that connection point, to use your expertise to solve some of the challenges that we face. I think there is a lot of opportunity for collaboration. Singapore Maritime Institute, I think, the executive director now is in Finland. They are having a student camp exchange with the Tunku University there, which is, I'm sure is very, very, very cold while we are in this warm climate. But it is about action and collaboration, right? And I think it is the joining of minds together to solve something that is of next generation, the reimagining tomorrow, and having a role in reimagining that tomorrow's landscape, which I think we should all take action for. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being here, sharing your perspectives with us. Before I invite Peter to formally close this session and thank our speakers, let me say a few words. One issue is that this was, I think, back in mid-1990s when I first heard Dennis Pegden talk about digital twins. I mean, at the time, he wasn't using the terminology digital twin, but he was saying that, look, on the one side, I have the real system. On the other side, I have the simulation system, real exchange of data, so that when something goes wrong, the simulation can take over and then can give us some guidance, can do some predictive type of work. At the time, we didn't have the technology. Now we do. We have the infrastructure, we have the sensors, we have the hardware, and a lot of you guys are actually developing some very, very cool algorithms to graduate simulation into a decision support tool in a real-time basis. Yesterday, there was an excellent keynote on the PhD colloquium that talked about data-driven simulations. A lot of my colleagues here are doing really, really cool work. For example, Jeff Hong has a series of papers that talks about offline simulations coupled with online applications. So I think we have a big role to play here. We have the capability, we have the intellectual horsepower, and we have the experts with the domain knowledge. So I think the future, at least for the young people in our community, is really bright. And I hope that this keynote panel was instrumental in giving you some seeds of interesting ideas for further research. With this, I'm going to ask Peter to come and formally close the session and thank our speakers.
Actually, we have a token of appreciation for the 3 panelists, so please bear with us 1 minute. And then afterwards, you may right away proceed for lunch next door.
Well, let me just say thank you to all of you for being here this morning, and bon appetit with the lunch, and please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for being here this morning. Thank you.